The locksmith finished before 10 in the morning. I stood on my own porch, holding a set of new keys still warm from his hand, and watched my husband's car pull into the driveway like nothing had changed. He didn't know yet. He was still smiling. He walked up the steps with his gym bag over his shoulder, already talking about dinner reservations, and I let him get all the way to the door before he tried the handle, and it didn't turn. He tried again. Then he looked at me, confused, like a man checking if the world was broken or if he was. "Whitney, what did you do?" I looked at him the way you look at a stranger asking for directions. Calm, almost polite. "You told me I'd never survive without your money, Grant," I said. "I just wanted you to see me try." My name is Whitney Halloway, and this is the story of how my husband said those words to humiliate me. And 6 months later, he was living out of his car while I was standing in a life he never thought I could build without him. Let me back up, because none of this happened overnight. Nothing like this ever does. If I've learned anything from the last 3 years of my life, it's that disasters don't usually arrive like lightning. They arrive slowly, like water finding a crack in a foundation, and you don't notice the damage until the whole wall is soaked through. I met Grant Halloway when I was 26 years old. He was 31, already climbing fast at a regional insurance firm in Columbus, Ohio, already the kind of man who ordered wine like he'd studied it in some class I'd never taken, already comfortable in rooms that made me nervous. I was a dental hygienist back then, steady paycheck, quiet apartment, nothing dramatic about my life at all. He liked that about me. He told me once, early on, that I was easy, meaning simple, meaning low maintenance, and for years I actually thought that was a compliment. I look back now and wonder how many other things he said in those early years that I mistranslated as love. We dated for almost 2 years before he proposed. It happened at a restaurant downtown, the kind with white tablecloths and a wine list thicker than a paperback novel. He got down on one knee in front of the whole dining room, and everyone clapped, and I remember feeling like the luckiest woman in Franklin County. My mother, Carol Ann Whitfield, called me crying that same night, saying she always knew I'd land somewhere soft. My father had passed when I was 19, so it was just the two of us for a long time, and she wanted softness for me more than anything else in the world. We got married the following spring, when I was 28. It was a beautiful wedding, small but elegant, held at a vineyard about 40 minutes outside the city. Grant's mother, Deborah Halloway, gave a toast that I still remember almost word for word because it stuck with me in a way I didn't understand until much later. She raised her glass and said, "To Whitney for being smart enough to find a man who will take care of everything." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. At the time, it sounded like praise. Later, I understood it as a kind of prophecy nobody meant to make true. For the first few years of our marriage, things were good. Not perfect. No marriage is, but good in the way that matters, the ordinary way. We bought a 3-bedroom colonial house in a quiet suburb just outside Columbus on a street called Belhaven Court, with a crooked mailbox Grant always meant to fix and never did. That mailbox became something of a running joke between us. I used to tease him about it every autumn when the leaves piled up around its leaning post. "One of these days," he'd say, laughing, "one of these days I'll fix it." He never did. I think about that mailbox a lot now, actually, how it stood crooked for 9 years, and nobody ever forced it to fall, until suddenly, all at once, it did. We had our daughter, Nora Halloway, when I was 31 years old. She came into the world on a freezing morning in February, 6 pounds 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair that made the delivery nurse laugh out loud. Grant cried when he held her for the first time, actual tears, and in that moment, I remember thinking that whatever cracks existed in our marriage before, this tiny person would somehow seal them shut. I know now that children don't work that way. They don't fix what's broken. Sometimes they just make the broken things harder to walk away from. It was around the time Nora turned 1 that the shape of our marriage started shifting, slowly, the way water changes stone over years instead of days. Grant began suggesting, gently at first, that I stop working. "Why would you spend your days cleaning people's teeth for $40 an hour when I make 6 figures?" he said one night over dinner, half joking in that particular way people joke about things they actually mean, leaving themselves room to deny it later if I pushed back. I loved my job. I loved the routine of it, the patients who knew my name, the small satisfaction of a clean, healthy smile. But I also loved peace, and somewhere along the way I convinced myself that staying home with Nora was a gift I was giving myself, not a surrender I was making to him. It took almost 2 years for me to understand it was both. Grant started managing everything financial in our household, not with any dramatic announcement, but through 100 small, reasonable-sounding suggestions. "I don't want you to have to deal with this stuff, Whit. Let me handle it. You've got enough on your plate with Nora." He said things like that so often and so kindly that it never once occurred to me to argue. The mortgage, the credit cards, the retirement accounts, the checking account, one by one, my name slipped quietly off things, replaced by authorized user instead of co-owner. I didn't notice at the time. Why would I? He made it sound like protection, like care, like exactly the kind of husband my mother had always hoped I'd find. Here's a detail I want you to remember, because it matters enormously later in this story. When my grandmother, Ruth Ann Delgado, passed away during Nora's first year of life, she left me $11,000 in a small inheritance. She also left me something else, something that seemed, at the time, almost like an afterthought. 4 acres of undeveloped land near Bardstown, Kentucky, land that had belonged to her family for 2 generations. Mostly forgotten, mostly worthless on paper, tucked quietly into a trust with my name on it and nobody else's. Grant suggested I put the $11,000 into our investment account, the one he managed personally through his firm. I agreed without much thought, because it felt practical, because he explained the tax advantages in a way that made sense to me, because trusting him at the time felt like the easier and kinder choice. I signed the paperwork without reading every single line, the way you sign the terms and conditions on your phone without scrolling to the bottom. I had no idea, sitting at that kitchen table with a pen in my hand, that I was slowly signing myself out of my own financial life. The small warning signs came quietly after that, the way most warning signs do, disguised as normal conversation. He'd correct me in front of friends about numbers, about our budget, about bills, always with a small, easy smile. Like he was simply being helpful, simply stating a fact. "Whitney doesn't really deal with the finances," he told his coworker Marcus Reyes at a backyard barbecue one summer, like it was an amusing little fact about me, like I was a woman who couldn't quite hold a fork the right way at a fancy dinner. I laughed along, the way you're supposed to. I always laughed along. Looking back, I wonder how many times I laughed at jokes that were quietly rewriting who I was in the eyes of everyone around me. Nora was 5 years old when she asked me something I have never forgotten, something that still gives me a small chill even now. We were in the kitchen together on an ordinary Tuesday evening. She was sitting at the table with her crayons, drawing a lopsided picture of our house, while I stood at the stove stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce. Out of nowhere, in the easy, unfiltered way that only small children can manage, she said, "Mommy, why does Daddy say the house is his?" I stopped stirring. My hand actually froze on the wooden spoon. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He told Grandma Deborah on the phone that it's his house, not yours too. She said it like she was reporting the weather, completely unaware of the small earthquake she'd just caused inside me. I smiled and told her that was just how grown-ups sometimes talked, that of course the house belonged to both of us, that Daddy just meant it a certain way. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her crayons. And the moment passed as quickly as it came for her. But that night, lying awake next to Grant's steady, untroubled breathing, I found myself thinking hard about the mortgage refinance papers I had signed 2 years earlier, papers Grant had handed me at the kitchen table with a stack of sticky notes marking exactly where to sign. I tried to remember whose name was actually on the deed. I genuinely could not recall. That was the first time I felt something cold settle low in my stomach, something I didn't have a name for yet. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was closer to the beginning of paying attention. The way you start noticing a strange sound in your car engine, not because you know what's wrong yet, but because some instinct in you has decided it's time to start listening. The betrayal, when it finally came, didn't arrive as one single knife to the chest. It arrived as several small ones, scattered across weeks, and then one enormous one that made all the small ones suddenly make sense, the way puzzle pieces snap into place once you finally see the picture on the box. It started, almost absurdly, with Grant's phone charger. My own phone had died that evening, and I was sitting on the living room couch using his charger because mine was upstairs when a text notification lit up his screen. The name on the message read, Ashley Work, and the preview line, visible without me even touching the phone, said something I will never forget. Can't wait for Thursday. Tell Whitney you have a client dinner again, LOL. I remember staring at that little gray text bubble for what felt like a very long time. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't wake Grant, who was upstairs already asleep. I sat with that message alone in the quiet living room, feeling something inside me go very still, very careful, very quiet, the way an animal goes still right before it decides whether to run or to watch. I sat with that discovery for 3 full days before I said a single word to Grant about it. I wanted to be sure. I wanted actual proof, not just suspicion, because I already understood something important about my husband after 9 years of marriage. If I came at him with raw feelings, with tears, with accusations, he would find a way to turn the conversation around on me before I even finished my sentence. He was skilled at that. He could make an accusation sound like an overreaction, could make hurt feelings sound like paranoia, and I had watched him do it to other people at dinner parties often enough to know exactly how the trick worked. So instead, I watched. Quietly, carefully, the way you'd watch a pot you suspect is about to boil over. I noted dates when he claimed to have client dinners. I noted late nights that didn't match the calendar on the refrigerator. And then, about a week later, doing laundry on a Sunday afternoon, a hotel receipt fell out of the inside pocket of his gray suit jacket. It was from the Marriott on Route 33, dated exactly 2.5 weeks earlier, $189, charged on a Tuesday night he had told me, quite specifically, he was in Cleveland for a regional conference. I held that little slip of paper in my hand for a long moment before folding it carefully and putting it in the drawer of my nightstand, underneath a stack of old birthday cards. I didn't confront him that day. I wasn't ready yet. I needed to be completely sure of what I was walking into, because I understood even then that whatever conversation came next would change the entire architecture of my life. I confronted him on a Sunday evening, 3 weeks after finding that receipt, after Nora had been tucked into bed with her stuffed rabbit, and the house had gone quiet around us. I laid the hotel receipt down on the kitchen table between us, flat and deliberate, like a hand of cards I was finally choosing to reveal. Grant looked at it. Then he looked at me. And I watched him decide in real time, sitting across that same table where we'd eaten 1,000 ordinary dinners. Not to lie. "It's not what you think," he said, which of course meant it was exactly what I thought. Word for word. Down to the last detail. Her name was Ashley Cormier. She worked 2 floors above him at the firm, in the underwriting department. It had been going on, he finally admitted, staring down at his own hands instead of at me for almost 8 months. I asked him only one question that night, and I asked it very calmly, the way you might ask someone what time it is. "Do you love her?" He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched out long enough to become its own kind of answer, longer than any word could have been. "Whitney, you have to understand," he finally said, running a hand through his hair the way he did when he was building an excuse in real time. "Things haven't been the same between us in a long time. You stopped, I don't know, trying. You stopped being the woman I married." I remember thinking, in a strange, distant sort of way, that this was the exact moment in every story like mine where the wronged woman is supposed to scream, supposed to throw a plate, supposed to fall completely apart at the kitchen table. I didn't feel any of that rising in me. Instead, I felt oddly still, almost like I was standing several feet outside my own body, watching a composed woman at a kitchen table receive information she had, on some level, already half known for a very long time. "I want a divorce," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected it to. Grant's face changed then, and not into guilt, not into remorse, but into something closer to genuine disbelief, as though I had just broken a rule he didn't know existed between us. "Are you serious right now?" he said, leaning back in his chair. "Whitney, think about this rationally for 1 second. You don't work full-time. You have no real income of your own. Nora's in 1st grade. What exactly do you think you're going to do? Go back to cleaning teeth for $20-something an hour and try to pay rent on that? I'm not trying to be cruel here. I'm being realistic with you." He paused, and then he said the sentence that I would carry with me for the next 6 months like a stone in my pocket. "You will never survive without my money." I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment, the way I had to sit with it that night, because this entire story bends around those 9 words. You will never survive without my money. I didn't respond to him right away. I stood up from the table, walked upstairs, and checked on Nora, who was sleeping peacefully with her stuffed rabbit tucked securely under her chin, completely unaware that her small world had just quietly cracked in half downstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long, long time. Longer than I can accurately measure now, just breathing, just thinking. That's when I made a decision that had absolutely nothing to do with rage, and everything to do with proving one very quiet, very specific point to myself, if to no one else. The weeks that followed were, without question, some of the hardest of my entire life, and I want to be honest about that, instead of pretending I floated through them on pure grit and clever one-liners the way it might sound in the retelling. Grant moved out within 2 weeks, into a rental apartment across town, though I later learned this wasn't out of guilt or consideration for me and Nora. His lawyer, a sharp older man named Douglas Finch, had apparently advised him that it would look better in front of a judge if he wasn't the one technically abandoning the marital home, leaving his wife and daughter there instead. Meanwhile, I began discovering just how thin the ground beneath me actually was, one document at a time. My name, it turned out, was not on the mortgage. It never had been, not since Grant quietly refinanced our home 2 years earlier, using his higher credit score to secure a better rate, a move he'd framed to me at the time as simply smart financial planning. Somewhere in that stack of refinancing paperwork, my name had dropped off entirely, and I had signed it without truly reading every line, trusting the man across the table from me the way you trust a doctor holding a needle. My name wasn't on our primary investment account either, the one that held both my grandmother's original $11,000 and years of contributions from our joint income. The shared checking account, the one meant for household expenses, had exactly $4,112 in it, and Douglas Finch sent a formal letter the following week reducing Grant's voluntary support payments to $600 a month, pending what he called formal proceedings. I sat at my kitchen table one gray Tuesday afternoon with Nora's school supply list in one hand, $42 for folders, crayons, and a specific brand of glue sticks, and a stack of unopened bills in the other, and for the first time in almost 9 years of marriage, I let myself feel exactly how frightened I truly was. Not for long, and not in front of Nora, who was in the next room watching cartoons, blissfully unaware. Just long enough, alone in that kitchen, to be completely honest with myself about the size of the hole I was standing in. But here is something nobody tells you about hitting a genuine low point in your life. It is also the only place quiet enough to actually hear yourself think clearly, without the noise of your old life drowning everything out. Sitting there at that table, staring at unpaid bills and a school supply list, I found myself thinking, almost involuntarily, about my grandmother's forgotten piece of land in Kentucky. Here is the detail I planted earlier in this story, the one I asked you to remember, and here is exactly where it pays off. When my grandmother, Ruth Ann Delgado, passed away, she hadn't just left me $11,000 in cash, the money Grant had absorbed into his investment account years ago. She had also left me, through a small trust arranged by her longtime estate lawyer, 4 acres of quiet, undeveloped land near Bardstown, Kentucky, land that had belonged to our family for 2 generations, mostly forgotten, mostly assumed worthless, sitting untouched in a trust that had never once been folded into any of our marital finances. It wasn't a joint asset. It had never been touched by Grant's careful reorganizing of our money, because it wasn't part of our finances at all. It was mine, solely, inherited, protected by a trust document bearing only my name. I had almost entirely forgotten about it. Grant knew vaguely that there was some land out there somewhere, but he had dismissed it years ago as essentially worthless, because that's exactly what I had told him at the time. A small, sentimental family plot with no real value, easier to downplay in casual conversation than to explain the full family history behind it. It sat quietly in the back of my mind for nearly 6 years, gathering dust in a filing cabinet drawer along with old photographs and expired coupons. I called my grandmother's estate lawyer, a sharp, warm-voiced woman named Patricia Alvarez, who had handled Ruth Ann's affairs for over a decade and remembered me the moment I said my name. "Whitney, honey, that land isn't worthless anymore," she told me over the phone, and I could practically hear her sitting forward in her office chair as she said it. There's been serious interstate development talk near Bardstown for almost 2 years now. I actually tried reaching you about it 18 months ago, but the number I had on file must have been outdated. It turned out a logistics company was quietly buying up parcels of land along that particular corridor to build a regional distribution hub, the kind that creates hundreds of local jobs and drives land values up practically overnight. My 4 acres, forgotten and untouched for years, were suddenly worth, according to 2 separate appraisals Patricia arranged for me, somewhere in the range of $240,000 to the right buyer. I did not tell Grant. I told absolutely no one except Patricia Alvarez, and eventually, once things were far enough along, my own divorce attorney, a sharp, methodical woman named Renata Osei, whom I hired using a portion of that land sale money the very week it cleared into my new personal account, one that existed entirely outside of anything Grant had ever managed or even known about. Renata's very first piece of advice to me was refreshingly simple. Don't announce anything, Whitney. Don't celebrate. Don't post anything. Don't even hint at it to friends who might mention it to him. Let him keep believing exactly what he already believes about you. That belief is going to work heavily in our favor before this is over. So that is precisely what I did. I kept living quietly and modestly, exactly as before. I took on a part-time per diem hygienist position 3 days a week, reestablishing a small income on paper, unremarkable and ordinary, exactly the kind of thing Grant fully expected from me. Underneath that plain, unremarkable surface, Renata was quietly building a case using months of bank records that folded hotel receipt from my nightstand drawer, detailed documentation of Grant's spending patterns, and the full refinancing history that Grant assumed had erased me cleanly from the house we'd shared for 9 years. Because here is something Grant did not know, and something Douglas Finch had apparently either overlooked or underestimated. Ohio is what's called an equitable distribution state, which means a marital home refinanced during the marriage, even one where a spouse's name is later removed from the deed, can still be legally classified as a shared marital asset if mortgage payments were made using shared household income throughout the marriage. Renata built that argument slowly and precisely, brick by brick, document by document, over the course of nearly 4 months, while I said absolutely nothing to Grant and let him continue believing I was quietly drowning. The court date arrived almost exactly 4 months after Grant moved out. He showed up to the courthouse with Douglas Finch at his side, both of them wearing the particular kind of confidence that comes from a man who has already decided, in his own mind, exactly how a story is going to end before it's even been told. Grant looked across the courtroom at me as I walked in with Renata, and I watched him take in my simple navy blue blazer, my calm hands folded neatly in front of me, my steady, unhurried steps, and I could see him quietly recalibrating absolutely nothing, because he still believed, right up until the moment the numbers were finally read aloud, that he already knew exactly how this was going to go. He was wrong. Renata laid everything out plainly, without a hint of drama, the way you'd calmly read through a simple grocery list rather than deliver dramatic courtroom theater. The marital home on Belhaven Court, despite the refinancing 2 years earlier, was ruled to be a shared marital asset, based on 9 years of documented shared mortgage contributions from both of our incomes throughout the marriage. Grant's undisclosed relationship with Ashley Cormier, including the folded Marriott hotel receipt, along with a documented pattern of joint household funds spent on gifts and dinners connected to the affair, was formally entered into evidence, directly affecting the final spousal support calculations the judge would hand down. And critically, perhaps most critically of all, my Kentucky land and its recent sale were disclosed and confirmed as separate, legally protected inheritance property existing entirely outside the marital estate, meaning it belonged to me, and only me, completely untouched by the final settlement terms. The judge ordered the house to be sold, with proceeds split according to Ohio's equitable distribution standards. Grant was ordered to pay retroactive child support recalculated against his actual 6-figure income, not the artificially reduced number his lawyer had originally proposed to the court. And because of both the documented affair and the financial concealment uncovered during discovery, the final settlement leaned substantially further in my favor than either Grant or Douglas Finch had walked into that courtroom prepared for. Grant sat very still in his chair as the final numbers were read aloud by the judge. I watched something in his expression quietly crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but the way thin ice cracks slowly before it finally gives way all at once beneath the surface. Outside the courthouse, in the parking lot, he caught up to me before I reached my car. His voice, when he finally spoke, wasn't angry at all. It was smaller than I had ever heard it in 9 years of marriage. "Whitney, where did all of this come from? The lawyer, all of it. You didn't have any real money of your own." I turned to face him fully, and I felt absolutely no need to raise my voice, not even slightly. "I had my grandmother's land, Grant," I said simply. "You just never once thought to ask what it was actually worth, because you never really thought I was worth asking." I paused for just a moment, and then I said the line I had been quietly carrying inside me for exactly 6 months, the line that had started this entire chapter of my life. "You told me I'd never survive without your money. I just wanted you to see me try." Then I got into my car, started the engine, and drove to pick up Nora from her after-school program, and I did not look back to see the expression on his face as I pulled out of that parking lot. 6 months after our divorce was finally finalized, I heard through a mutual friend, Marcus Reyes from the old backyard barbecues, that Grant and Ashley had broken up not long after the settlement went through. Apparently, Ashley hadn't fully understood what she was signing up for once the child support order and the house settlement significantly ate into Grant's monthly disposable income. It seems that reduced financial comfort has a strange way of making certain relationships considerably less appealing. Grant had also, according to Marcus, lost the lease on his rental apartment after missing 2 consecutive monthly payments, and had spent a period of roughly 3 weeks actually sleeping in the backseat of his car in a 24-hour gym parking lot, showering there before work each morning, quietly telling coworkers he was simply between places while he figured things out. I did not feel any triumphant joy hearing that particular detail. I felt something much quieter instead. Something closer to a long overdue settling, like a scale that had finally come to rest flat, and even after years of being tipped hard in one direction. I used my share of the house sale proceeds, along with the remaining balance from the Kentucky land sale, to buy a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom home about 15 minutes from Nora's elementary school, close enough that she didn't have to change classrooms, didn't have to lose the small circle of friends she'd built over the years. I went back to hygiene work full-time within a few months, and within about a year, I was promoted to lead hygienist at my practice, training 2 newer employees myself, something that genuinely would have embarrassed the old version of me, the one who once quietly let a man tell dinner guests she didn't really deal with numbers. Nora, now 8 years old, adjusted the way children so often do to major changes. Slowly at first, and then almost all at once. She still sees her father every other weekend, and some Sunday evenings when he drops her back home, she comes inside noticeably quiet, and I've learned not to push her to talk before she's genuinely ready. Other weekends, she comes home talking excitedly about how Daddy's new apartment, the one he eventually managed to get back on his feet enough to properly afford again, has a small balcony where they grow tomato plants together. And I let her be genuinely excited about that, because her relationship with her father belongs to her to build in her own way, not mine to quietly manage or subtly punish from the sidelines. Grant and I are not friends, and I don't imagine we ever will be. We remain barely cordial at school pickups and drop-offs. He apologized to me once, almost a full year after the divorce was finalized, standing awkwardly by his car in the school parking lot, saying he was sorry for how everything ended between us. Though notably, he said nothing at all about the 8 months that came directly before things ended. I accepted his apology the way you might accept a coat that simply doesn't fit you anymore. Politely, without any real need or desire to actually wear it again. My mother, Carol Ann, cried once more, differently this time, when I finally told her the entire story from start to finish, including the details about the Kentucky land she had genuinely forgotten I even still owned. "Your grandmother always did say that land would matter someday," she told me over the phone, her voice thick with emotion. "She just never said exactly how, or exactly when." Deborah Halloway, Grant's mother, never once apologized for that wedding toast all those years ago. never apologized for years of small comments about how lucky I supposedly was to have found her son. I don't expect she ever will, honestly. Some people simply cannot afford to admit they were wrong about someone else, because doing so would mean admitting, at least partly, that they were wrong about their own child too. Here's what I've genuinely learned from all of this. And it isn't really about the money at all, not in the way you might expect. People will often tell you exactly how little they believe you're capable of, sometimes right to your face. And they will say it with such complete, unwavering confidence that you'll start to assume they must simply be right, purely because of how certain they sound. Grant wasn't entirely wrong, if I'm being fair, that I had built much of my adult life leaning heavily on him for nearly a decade. Where he was completely wrong was in assuming he already knew exactly what I'd do the moment that leaning stopped being available to me as an option. Sometimes the thing that ultimately saves you isn't a dramatic plan you carefully mapped out in advance. Sometimes it's a small, forgotten piece of land nobody thought to properly value, or a quiet skill you never actually stopped having, or 4 acres nobody ever bothered to ask you about at family dinners. But it is still yours, completely and entirely, and it still counts for something real, and it can still be enough. If you're willing to quietly, calmly pick it back up the moment everything else around you falls away. So here's my question for you, and I genuinely want to know the answer. Has anyone in your life ever confidently told you exactly what you'd never be able to do without them, and turned out to be completely dead wrong? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and I mean that sincerely. And if this story meant something real to you today, go ahead and subscribe, because there are many more stories just like mine waiting for you. Quiet women, consistently underestimated by the people closest to them, who didn't survive their worst chapters by accident. We survived on purpose.